Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Am Reading video for March 6th, 2020. I'm only talking about the books I've started so far in March in this video, but you can find a recap of my February reading in my monthly literary newsletter. I'll put a link down below. It includes snippets of my Goodreads reviews. I also include literary news that's of interest to me. I have a book pick and a book meme, and I include one of the videos from BookTube on it. Lots of bookish stuff, so yes, once again, it's down below. The big thing I've gotten through this week, almost finished, is with the audiobook of The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. And I'm mostly liking this book, which is a huge leap for me in Philip Roth. It's my third book I've read by him, and the first I don't outright hate. There are still some similarities between this one and his older works that I should definitely just stay away from by this point. I get it. But this does have a broader theme and appeal to a certain degree. It's an alternative history that imagines Charles Lindbergh, who was, well, an aviator pilot, a very famous guy, also someone with fascist sympathies, gaining the White House with an isolationist stance during World War II, claiming to want to keep America out of the war. But there's an underlying sense of dread on a nuanced, subtle sort of scale about his intentions toward the Jews in particular, because of his affiliation, his affinity for Adolf Hitler. And it's going to be an HBO miniseries starting in a couple weeks, so I'll link the trailer down below. Of course, you'd think right now it's being made in this moment because of some similar situations, I think, when it comes to populism and extreme right-wing swings in the government, and particularly for minorities, wondering like who you can trust and who your fellow Americans are when the policies that are being unrolled are so bigoted. And I think Roth does a nice job with rolling out some policies that in his book that some people can claim are not as hateful as they really are. There are some policies in place in Plot Against America to somewhat forcibly assimilate Jews and perhaps gather them in a place that might be suitable for concentration camps later on. You never know. But I like the foreboding sense of dread, which Roth peppers and sort of eases a little bit with more personal reminiscences. I think his whole point of writing this novel, as with I think all of his novels, is just to talk about himself, frankly. And in this case he doesn't even use his well-worn pseudonym from the ghostwriter and all of those novels. This time he just his narrator is himself, Philip Roth, as a 9-year-old boy, and I think his parents and his brother have exactly the same names, and he's very just on the surface, on the level, saying, I'm wondering what it would be like for me and my family if Lindbergh had been president. And there are a few flares where it's less believable in terms of how close some of his family members get to the president. But it's not as insufferable as some other authors who imagine themselves to be super important. But I can't deny that I think at the heart of this, Roth is probing and struggling with what he always seems to be probing and struggling with, which is his discomfort with being a Jew. He didn't have to make Lindbergh president to do that, because so far in all three of his novels it's been the same. In fact, I kind of think The Ghostwriter, which is one of his Zuckerman novels, kind of lays out the point of why should we remain so provincial and ghettoized, and why shouldn't we get out there and, you know, join something else? And And what annoyed me the most about the ghostwriter was how he claimed that Judaism is so parochial and ghettoized and self-righteous, but he just left it for something as equally parochial and self-righteous and also closed-minded to outsiders, which is the world of 1950s literary greats. Yeah, point me to the women in that group. But anyway, his women in The Plot Against America, well, they're not as bad as the shrill stereotypes of his other two novels that I've read. Who knows, maybe I'm being too hard on them just because it's Roth and he has a horrible reputation. Portnoy's Complaint was god-awful with this, especially with the female characters. The main two in Plot Against America are Roth's mother, who is a quiet, somewhat distrustful, scared housewife, although sort of the events of the novel kind of support some of her fears. And she also is known for being involved in her local PTA, and she takes a job for a while specifically to save up money for a Canadian bank account for the team Let's Leave This Failing Country. And the other major woman is Roth's Aunt Evelyn, who becomes one of those Jews who actually stands up for Lindbergh and claims that the lack of popularity he has and sort of the reactionary anti-popularity is based off of ghetto fears that are unfounded, and that Jews are refusing basically to adapt and to move on and realize that America is not going to turn on them, and that you can trust anybody on Lindbergh anyway on his surface. And I don't know, I'm a little more iffy with her because I feel like Roth is saying she's just opportunist and a slattern and I don't know, maybe I'm going too far with the slattern, but there is an aspect of that to her backstory too, and I don't know, I just feel like in a way he's being rather cynical about people's motives, even people on the other side, like Cousin Alvin, who joins the Canadian Army to fight Hitler because the US doesn't enter the war for a while longer. As always, the most fully fledged character in Roth's novel is always only going to be Roth himself. But he's definitely a little better, I think, with characters and with situations. They're not so comically one-dimensional and satirical or melodramatic, which I guess is odd to say about an alternative history with fascism in America's upper echelons. He seems to have a slightly more nuanced worldview about the broader picture of life around him, even if his grapplings with Judaism will never be mine. And also just in characterizations of people around him. I just think I might never trust Philip Roth. I just, I've been too burned by Portnoy's Complaint in particular. But I do think he's at least better in this book than he hasn't been before with making more realistic characters. I have a feeling I might grapple a little more with the ending of this book. I think there's going to be a bit of a corrective coming up where the alternative history takes a swerve back into real history. I might have looked at a few spoilers. But anyway, I think I've rambled on enough about this book for now, and I guess I have to admit to myself that it's at least pretty compelling. Next, I am not as far along into this book than I hope to be. This is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This is her debut novel from about 5 or so years ago. I've had this copy for almost as long from the used bookstore. I'm glad to finally be getting to it. I'm hoping also to get to her second novel soon. But this novel is about the interracial family, the Lees, mostly in the 60s and the 70s, mostly in the 70s really, We start with the death, the apparent suicide, it seems, so far, of their oldest daughter, Lydia. She drowns in a pond, we discover in the first chapter. And then we mostly flash back, as literary fiction often does, and we probe the family. And I think a big thing that Ng is exploring is the choices that lead us to where we are being sort of prescribed by family nurturing a lot of the time. Because we go into the backstories of Lydia's parents, her white mother Marilyn and her Chinese father James, and the choices they make in their lives and how they are very much influenced by the choices their parents made. And it seems like what Lydia did, suicide and other things, are also influenced by what her own parents foisted on her. And she also has an older brother, Nathan, and a younger sister, Hannah. And they also are well-drawn characters who are sort of under the orbit or under the sun that is Lydia, who's the favorite child of her two parents for different reasons. And also alluding to the title, a lot of this backstory narrative has to do with the fact that we, the readers, are discovering things about these characters that they don't tell each other. I think most poignantly, there's an episode where Marilyn runs away and leaves her family abruptly for 2 months. And the major impetus of this is after her mother dies, and her mother was this housekeeper, this woman who really aspired to house and home and just to sort of be the best sort of June Cleaver type character she could be. And the only snag was, well, the first one, I guess, was that her husband left her when Marilyn was very young. But her mother just kept living her life. She was a home ec teacher and just sort of lived this prim and proper Betty Crocker life and tried to pass it on to her daughter. And her daughter tried to rebel, and she was on her way to becoming a doctor, but near the end of her undergrad she met James, who was a history professor, and they fell in love, and she got married and pregnant, and so the doctor dreams are kind of put on hold for a little while. But after her mother dies and her two of her children are relatively young, she has this sort of crisis about the fact that she's turned into what her mother wanted for her, basically. This stay-at-home housewife who put her own dreams on hold. So she runs away for 2 months, basically to finish her degree and to look at med school. But she doesn't tell anybody any of this in any detail. So James and her children are basically thinking all sorts of things about why she left that aren't necessarily true. So that's just an example. I mean, another big one is, you know, in the current timeline with Lydia dead, her mother goes to look at the diaries that she gave her every Christmas, and they're all, you know, appallingly empty. So, you know, you're never going to know everything about, or they're never going to probably know everything about Lydia. And meanwhile, Nathan is looking suspiciously at a neighborhood boy whom he and Lydia were involved with in different ways, it seems. And I guess that's more or less where I am so far in this. I'm really liking it. I'm thinking certainly when this came out, and maybe at other times, I definitely would have given it 5 stars. I'm pretty sure. I'm not entirely sure I will this time, but I am finding it very moving and compelling. It's, you know, wonderful family drama, well drawn characters. I just like the psychology of it. I love the detailed descriptions of physical and the emotional environs. I love delving into interracial marriage and prejudice against Asian Americans in mid-century. Maybe there are a couple of details, particularly in Marilyn's backstory, that might be a touch too melodramatic, or I might be being nitpicky. One thing I know I'm probably being pretty nitpicky about is how abruptly Marilyn and James's relationship began, and how she kind of kissed him abruptly in their first meeting, and I'm like, I don't know, it seemed a bit much, but that's very small potatoes, it seems to me, as I say it aloud, and mostly I'm just being propelled along by the story, and I'm just pretty invested in the characters, I think. I'm not sure I'm invested enough for 5 stars, but I do think I'm really gonna like this book. But one of the major reasons I wish I was further along in it is because this weekend I'm hoping to attack STONY the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates Jr. This is a nonfiction work. I think it's going to be pretty thick and academic about the Jim Crow period in American history. The Jim Crow laws were segregationist laws meant basically, well, to keep white and black people separate, but also pretty implicitly to keep black people less equal in society in several ways to white people, and to keep basically white supremacy up. And anyway, that's all I will say about this right now, because I am reading it for the BookTube Prize Octafinals. The BookTube Prize is a year-long process of trying to whittle down the best in fiction and nonfiction published last year. We're at the very beginning of the judging process, and I'm an official judge for the group that this book is included in, and I will link to more information about the BookTube Prize down below. So that about covers it for me now. You may actually see me twice more this week before my Friday reads next week. I was thinking I'd only stick with doing 2 videos a week, including my Friday reads, but just the other day, Sean and Sean the Book Maniac tagged me in a tag. So I thought I might do a tag Tuesday, and I was also already planning to do the next in the Author's Answer series for writers on AuthorTube, which is technically also a tag series, so maybe I'll do a tag Thursday as well. Figure that'll be nice. Hopefully I can keep it all short and sweet, because along with having to read the BookTube Prize and my other reading and some other writing, hopefully, I'm doing some final rehearsals and a recital of sorts for Purim. Purim is a pretty minor Jewish holiday, but a pretty fun one as well. It's sort of the Jewish Halloween, and part of the festivities are the retelling of the Esther story, the Megillah, and I think most synagogues and Jewish organizations do little parody plays or so forth, and so it's really quite fun and particularly festive part of the holiday, so I'm looking forward to that. And anyway, Purim's on Monday, so yeah, after that hopefully I can get back into the BookTube swing of things again. Anyway, hope you're all having wonderful weekends, festive or otherwise. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.